You're sitting on $650 million and absolutely no one around you has a clue. Not the neighbors, not your friends, not even the familiar face at the diner who's been pouring your black coffee for years. There's no effort to disguise it. You simply live plain on purpose. While everyone else is sprinting after the appearance of wealth, you've already slipped into the real thing without announcing it. The strangest part? It didn't arrive with fanfare, just a dull email. Subject: Q3 Portfolio Summary. No drama, no celebration. You happen to be in a hardware store weighing a half-inch plumbing connector when it lands. And this is where $650 million begins to feel strangely unremarkable. It doesn't start in luxury. It begins in a hospital break room, standing in front of a vending machine. Nothing cinematic. Just an ordinary Tuesday, somewhere between finishing your shift and heading toward the parking garage elevator, when you notice the machine is empty and the neighboring one is stuck. Instead of brushing it off, you pause. Something about it shifts your attention. You start wondering, who actually owns this thing? That question follows you home. You spend roughly 40 minutes digging, longer than most people would ever bother. Eventually, a picture forms. A small operator. Someone managing maybe a dozen machines spread across a few buildings, earning roughly $40 to $120 per machine each month after costs and location fees. Nothing flashy, almost forgettable. Just numbers glowing quietly on a screen while the rest of the apartment stays still. But then you start calculating, and the calculation changes the way you see it. If a single machine in a decent spot nets around $80 monthly, then 5 machines bring in about $400. 10 machines push that near $800. Scale it to 25 machines, placed carefully in strong locations, and you're looking at roughly $1,200 to $3,000 every month, without needing to be there at all. The money itself stops being the center of attention. What stands out is the structure behind it. The machine doesn't depend on you. It just sits in a hallway, quietly solving a small inconvenience for whoever passes by, and keeps paying out as long as it exists. You invest $900 in your first unit, secondhand and a bit worn on one side. You secure a spot inside a mid-sized dental office, agreeing to a simple revenue split sealed with nothing more than a handshake. By the end of the first month, it generates $280 before costs. After product expenses, the location share, and a couple of restocking trips, you're left with $190. $190. Your coworker made more in a single overtime shift last weekend. Your cousin received a signing bonus large enough to outpace this machine's earnings for years. There are no congratulations. No one even notices. You sit with that number on a quiet Thursday and feel something subtle settle in. Neither pride nor disappointment, but something softer and harder to name. And still, you don't walk away, because your focus isn't the $190. It's what that $190 quietly confirms. That single result is enough to convince you the framework isn't a fluke. So instead of stopping at one unit, you add a second, and before long, a third follows. At the same time, your attention shifts. You begin observing coin laundromats the way you once observed that vending machine, no longer as a customer passing through, but as someone trying to decode what sits beneath ownership itself. You discover that a modest laundromat, often just a small row of 15 machines tucked into a strip mall along a highway, can bring in anywhere from about $60,000 to well over $200,000 annually. And the more you look, the clearer it becomes. When these places collapse, it's rarely because demand disappeared. It's usually management breakdowns, not a lack of customers. Laundry isn't optional. People don't stop needing it when the economy tightens. It doesn't fade during a market downturn or when equities drop sharply in a single quarter. It simply continues, cycle after cycle, load after load, year after year. Eventually, you commit. Your first purchase is a laundromat in Ohio for $47,000. It's located in a blue-collar neighborhood. The equipment isn't new, but it still runs reliably. The lease still has 6 years remaining. The former owner, a retired postal worker named Raymond Ellis, managed everything with nothing more than a basic phone and a spiral notebook. His records are chaotic, almost unreadable, but underneath the disorder, the cash flow is unmistakably real. Within the first year, it produces a net of roughly $38,000. There's no moment of celebration. Instead, You treat it like fuel. It becomes the foundation for the next acquisition. This is the invisible layer of the story, the expansion no one talks about. Not the flashy scaling, not the polished portfolio, not the neat narrative of compounding over 8 quiet years, just someone running numbers late at night at a kitchen table. A passing observation on a Tuesday that turns into a question by Wednesday, and by Thursday becomes a signed purchase, eventually evolving into something that still doesn't have a simple name. At that point, the figures themselves stop feeling important. What matters is the structure underneath them. Your accountant, Elena Brooks, has been handling small business books for nearly 2 decades. She has seen everything from messy sole proprietorships to restaurant owners who literally store receipts in cardboard boxes. She is not easily impressed. She meets you in the back office of your third laundromat, sitting at a folding table. You slide a folder across to her. Inside is a full snapshot of your holdings. She goes through it slowly, saying nothing at first. Then she finally looks up and remarks that it might be the most intentionally dull portfolio she has ever reviewed. She means it as a critique. You take it as confirmation you're on the right track. Because that's exactly the point. Not branding, not storytelling, not mission statements or presentations. Just a set of quiet assets, solving unremarkable but essential needs while steadily generating monthly cash, whether anyone is paying attention or not. Inside that folder are 4 coin laundromats spread across 2 Midwestern states. Together, they bring in roughly $290,000 in gross revenue each year. After covering utilities, repairs, staffing, and operating costs, what remains lands at about $110,000 in net profit. It isn't impressive on paper. No headline material, nothing that would earn a podcast invitation. But it behaves like clockwork income, arriving each month the same way rent does. Because in essence, it is rent. Laundry never stops being necessary. That demand doesn't flinch during recessions or economic shocks. Then there are 2 municipal parking sites picked up through county tax auctions, those quiet Tuesday sessions in civic buildings where attendance is usually almost non-existent. The first one came in at $29,500, the second at $41,000. Combined, they now produce a little over $54,000 annually, after upkeep and insurance. There's no daily involvement. A part-time manager handles operations. Your only interaction is seeing the monthly deposit land in your account, and that's about it. Next are 3 highway billboard sites along state routes across Tennessee and Kentucky. You don't sell ad space. You own the ground beneath them. Advertising firms lease that space through long agreements, typically ranging from 5 to 15 years, often with built-in yearly increases. Each location currently brings in somewhere between $750 and $1,250 a month in land rent. Some weeks pass and you don't even think about them being yours. Then there's the commercial cleaning business. You purchased it 3 years ago from a retiring owner named Harold Mason, a man in his late 60s, who spent nearly 28 years building it into something that practically ran itself. It holds 12 contracted accounts, office complexes, a medical facility, and 2 school districts. Annual revenue sits around $1.5 million. Margins are modest but consistent, the kind of stability that doesn't attract attention and never tries to. Elena Brooks flips through the file again and asks if you're considering something more aggressive. Maybe a tech venture, multi-unit residential deals, anything with higher upside. You answer no. She nods, as if she already expected it, even if she doesn't quite connect with the reasoning behind it. What isn't obvious to most people, what sits just below the surface of all that paperwork, is the pattern tying everything together. Each asset exists because it serves a demand that doesn't disappear. Not in downturns, not when rates climb, not when platforms rise and fall or habits shift overnight. People will always park. People will always do laundry. Buildings accumulate dirt every single day, and someone has to remove it. Drivers on a highway will always see whatever stands on that billboard, whether they intend to or not. There's no app that replaces any of this. No breakthrough waiting in the wings to make a parking lot obsolete. And that is exactly the logic. While others chase visibility, raising rounds, scaling fast, competing in arenas where attention itself is the battleground, you stay in spaces where usefulness matters more than noise, and where the work continues regardless of who is watching. A single weak quarter is enough to wipe out years of steady progress. That's the kind of arena you're not playing in, and not accidentally either. You've positioned yourself far away from it on purpose, almost like you drew a hard line and refused to cross it. Instead, you operate in what you think of as Tuesday morning economies. Dull, overlooked systems that keep functioning no matter what headlines say. The places that never become exciting news because they simply never stop working. Elena Brooks shuts the folder in front of her. "The quarterly report will be ready by Thursday," she says. You nod, thank her, and head out. Later, you're driving your 2019 Honda Pilot with just over 91,000 miles on it. There's still that scuff on the rear bumper you noticed ages ago, something you planned to fix, yet somehow never got around to. And you still don't. At a networking event that evening, you spot a familiar type immediately. He's dressed in a minimal white t-shirt that somehow costs $340, something you only know because you once looked up the brand out of curiosity. He arrived in a matte gray Range Rover with a custom finish, the kind of vehicle designed to be seen before anything else about the person inside it. He speaks about investments like they're an extension of his identity, projecting his words outward, as if the room itself is part of his audience. Everything about him feels deliberately constructed for visibility. Meanwhile, you arrived in that same well-used Honda Pilot with the worn bumper. Your outfit is simple. A discounted fleece from a sports retailer. Your wristwatch just tells time. Nothing more, nothing less. When he eventually asks what you do, you keep it short. You mention owning a handful of small operations, mostly laundromats, a few additional ventures on the side. You can practically see the mental sorting happen behind his eyes. Old car, plain clothes, laundry businesses. In a matter of seconds, he files you away as unremarkable, maybe stable, definitely not someone to focus on. He offers a polite smile and shifts his attention elsewhere. And that moment of being dismissed, that quiet reduction in his attention span, it matters more than anything else that night, because once someone decides you're not important, they stop tracking you. And when you're no longer being tracked, your room to move expands dramatically. People misunderstand what stealth wealth is supposed to mean. They think it's about humility or some refined emotional detachment from status. In reality, for you, it's tactical. The ordinary exterior isn't an identity, it's cover. The Honda isn't symbolic at all. It's practical machinery. It starts every morning, handles distance without complaint, and blends into every parking lot without drawing a second glance. Look at the numbers. The typical new car sale today is near $48,000, and monthly payments often hover around $735. You bought your vehicle outright years ago, and have only paid for fuel and routine maintenance since then. Every dollar that doesn't get locked into a depreciating asset is redirected into things that can actually grow over time. That's the entire logic. Not complicated, just rarely followed. Your home follows the same pattern. A quiet three-bedroom colonial tucked into a suburban street, purchased more than a decade ago. The mortgage finally disappeared from your life about 2 years back. To the neighbors, you read like a modestly successful small business owner. And in a way, that's accurate. Just missing a few extra zeros they'll never see. You don't bother correcting anyone. What experience has drilled into you is that being seen carries a cost that has nothing to do with bills or taxes. The instant people can measure what you own, they stop interacting with you directly and start interacting with your perceived resources. The tone of conversations subtly bends. Requests begin to surface out of nowhere. A distant cousin you haven't heard from in years suddenly finds your number. Someone from your church circle mentions a project they've been sitting on. Even family starts floating ideas that conveniently require funding to become real. You've watched it happen to others enough times to recognize the pattern. Wealth doesn't just change a bank account, it shifts the temperature of every room it enters. Not out of cruelty, not even awareness most of the time, just human behavior responding to what it can see. So you keep things deliberately understated. Simple clothes, the same reliable Honda Pilot, laundry done at ordinary places, a look that says stable, comfortable, nothing more. It costs almost nothing to maintain, yet it buys something no investment can: the freedom to move through your own life without becoming a magnet for everyone else's expectations. At the networking event, the man wearing a $330 designer tee is now locked into an animated exchange with a startup founder. He gestures constantly, leaning forward as if the entire room depends on his next sentence. That familiar performance energy fills the space, people acting like they're being observed even when they aren't. You grab a glass of water, speak with a couple of people you actually intended to meet, and slip out before 8:30. Driving back, you pass a self-serve car wash lit harshly under fluorescent lights. It's unusually crowded for a weekday evening. You file it away mentally, thinking about ownership, revenue, what kind of operator runs something like that. The pilot doesn't demand anything from you, so you just keep going. Your closest friend is Marcus. You've known him since college days, played pickup basketball together every Sunday for years, and he stood beside you at your mother's funeral. He's the kind of person who calls without motive, just a check-in on a random weekday, no agenda attached. Those kinds of friendships are rare, and you understand that better than most. About 3 months back, Marcus called on a Wednesday. The conversation started like always, easy and unforced, but something underneath it shifted as he spoke. He'd been building a food truck concept for the last couple of years. Solid food, steady following, even local press attention. Now he wanted to expand, locking in a lease for a small brick-and-mortar space downtown. The math worked. The timing made sense. What he needed was $82,000. And you knew, sitting there in your car outside a laundromat, that you could have transferred it before the call even ended. No hesitation, no strain, nothing more than a tap on a screen. $85,000, sitting against your current financial snapshot, is roughly equivalent to about 11 days of passive income flowing through your investments. It doesn't register as a loss. It barely even qualifies as a financial choice. And still, you didn't move the money. You stayed on the line with the phone pressed to your ear, fully aware of what you were capable of, and made the deliberate decision to hold back. That awareness carries a strange emotional weight. It isn't guilt in any pure sense, and it isn't simple self-interest either. It's something more layered, the quiet isolation of seeing the situation with absolute clarity while someone you care about is living inside a blur. Over time, you've come to understand something uncomfortable. Capital given to someone without the right operational foundation rarely fixes anything. It tends to magnify existing weaknesses. If systems are loose, they loosen further. If cash flow literacy is missing, if the relationship between revenue and actual margin isn't understood, if lease obligations aren't fully grasped, then an influx of money doesn't rescue the business. It just speeds up the version of failure that was already in motion. And when that happens, the money disappears, and often so does the relationship around it. You've witnessed it before, not with Evan Cole, but you've seen it happen elsewhere. So instead of transferring the funds, you asked Evan if you could sit down with him on Saturday morning. You arrived at his kitchen table with a notebook and spent 3 straight hours going line by line through his financials. 2 hidden cost areas emerged immediately, quietly draining his operations every month. You pushed deeper, asking about lease clauses, rent increases over time, personal guarantees, and what his plan was if month 18 came and customer traffic fell 30% below projections. Some of those answers weren't there, not because he lacked intelligence, but because no one had ever forced those questions into the open with him before. You kept returning the next Saturday and the one after that. By the 4th week, Evan had renegotiated supplier contracts, found a small business administration funding program he qualified for, and reshaped his expansion timeline so it no longer depended on outside investment. Between an SBA loan totaling about $60,000 and a small municipal grant, he secured what he needed internally. 6 weeks later, the lease was signed. When he finally got the keys, he called you that night, voice breaking in that unmistakable way people sound when something long imagined finally becomes real. He told you he wouldn't have made it there without you. You never mentioned that the money had already been within reach, and you likely never will. It isn't about humility. It's about letting the outcome belong entirely to the life that actually built it. There are still parts of your existence that remain sealed off to everyone else, spaces no one else ever steps into. That doesn't really get easier with time. It's not the act of keeping things hidden that weighs on you anymore. You've adapted to that. What lingers is something sharper, sitting across from someone you care about while they wrestle with a problem you could erase in less than a minute, and choosing not to, choosing it fully, living with that choice over repeated Saturdays at a kitchen table that starts to feel heavier each week. Your structure holds. Day-to-day life continues to shield you. Investments move in silence. Accounts expand without witnesses, and no one ever asks questions. Yet the absence of witnesses becomes its own strange pressure. On certain nights, that invisibility feels like a cost that doesn't have a name. Then a Thursday morning breaks at 7:12 a.m. You're inside a Home Depot aisle lined with plumbing supplies. Not because it was the plan, but because one of your laundromats flagged a slow-draining utility sink and the property manager sent over a photo. You were already out, so you handled it. A bottle of drain cleaner sits in your hand while your other hand scrolls your phone, trying to decide whether the pipe under that sink is PVC or metal, since the wrong assumption would mean the wrong fix. That's when the notification arrives. An email from your accountant, Elena Brooks. The subject line reads, Q2 Portfolio Summary. Final. She always sends them with the same rigid formatting. Identical font. Identical structure. Every quarter without exception. Normally, you'd ignore it until the weekend, when coffee and quiet make it easier to skim numbers that don't feel urgent. But this time, something in the preview catches you before you can dismiss it. You set the drain cleaner back onto the shelf. You open the message. You read the opening line twice because your mind refuses to accept it on the first pass. The figure is stated with clinical precision. Your verified net worth, factoring in property, business holdings, liquid capital, and investments, has passed $650 million. For a moment, you don't move. The overhead lights hum softly. Somewhere deeper in the store, a forklift pulses its reverse alarm. A customer a few steps away studies copper fittings like it's the most ordinary decision in the world. Nobody glances your way. Nobody has any idea what just landed in your hands. The store doesn't react. The machine doesn't react. The number exists only inside a phone screen, held by someone still thinking about pipe material in a laundromat somewhere in Ohio, and that's what makes it surreal. There's no celebration, no witnesses, no dramatic turning point, just industrial lighting, the faint chemical smell of hardware aisles, and a figure that has been quietly compounding through years of unnoticed decisions, small movements, and ordinary Saturdays that never looked like anything at all. You expected a rupture in reality, a moment where the air itself would feel reconfigured, like the universe briefly acknowledging a turning point. You had built this scene in your head as something ceremonial, an obvious before and after split, something you could physically sense crossing over. But nothing opens up, no seam appears in the world. Instead, it's just the plumbing aisle under harsh store lights, the distant rattle of a forklift, and an email thread with Elena Brooks sitting unchanged in your inbox. Everything around you continues behaving exactly as it was a minute earlier. The system doesn't pause for recognition. It never does. You send a short reply to Elena Brooks. 3 words. Nothing more. Looks good. Thanks. Then the moment passes as easily as any other task. You take the drain cleaner again, lift it like it's just another item on a checklist, snap a quick photo of the label to forward to the property manager, and head toward checkout as if nothing significant has occurred at all. The register reads $8.47. You don't scan a loyalty card, not out of principle, but because you honestly never remember if you even signed up for one. Outside, you sit in the driver's seat longer than necessary before turning the key. The silence in the car feels heavier than the purchase itself. Your mind drifts back more than a decade. 11 years earlier, you once cleared $210 from reselling an old vending machine pulled out of a small clinic lobby. You remember sitting with that number late at night, unable to classify what it meant. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't disappointment either. It just existed, too small to announce, too strange to ignore. Now it feels identical, only scaled up, same emotional texture, just layered with extra zeros that don't fundamentally change the shape of it. And that realization hits quietly. Maybe it was never about the size of the outcome at all. Maybe it was always about structure, the internal proof that a system you designed is actually functioning in the real world. No audience, no applause, no awareness from anyone standing between the shelves of a hardware store. You start the engine. The laundromat issue doesn't solve itself just because a number shifted somewhere in the background. So you drive back the same route, same vehicle, same unresolved crack still visible on the bumper that you've learned to stop noticing. From the outside, nothing has changed, not today, not tomorrow. The laundromat will open at 6 o'clock sharp. Elena Brooks will likely send another message asking for updated Q3 projections. Marcus will still have a line forming around his food truck during lunch hours. But something internal has shifted in a way that's almost impossible to point at directly. Because at some point, you start noticing a pattern you wouldn't have understood years ago. People constantly perform wealth, while others quietly construct it. And seeing that difference doesn't make the next day any easier. It just changes the question that follows you into every ordinary moment after that. What exactly are you building here? And who is it really for?